It's High Noon on In the Loop.
High Noon brought to you by the Pace Lubin School of Business. Earn a master's in accounting in as little as 1 year at the Lubin School of Business at Pace University and be fully prepared for the CPA exam upon graduation. Visit pace.edu/CPA. And High Noon is when we feature our big guest for the session. Today, it is Bill Isaac, chairman of Fifth Third Bank Corp., but also the former FDIC chairman and the author of Senseless Panic: How Washington Failed America. Bill, great to have you back on In the Loop.
Good to be with you again, Betty.
And wow, don't tell us your opinion there with your title, right? How Washington Failed America. And you saw a lot of that this week, right? Where we have been watching the MF Global hearings. We've had 3 days of the Supreme Court hearing on the healthcare law. You've been out of the Washington scene in the sense of, as an official capacity for a number of years. I mean, do you believe that it's gotten that much worse?
Yes, I do. I think our government has become highly dysfunctional, which is one reason why I wrote the book. I believe that we really made a number of mistakes in the way we regulate financial institutions over the past 20 years, adopted a lot of policies that we shouldn't have adopted, and removed some rules we shouldn't have removed, and that led to the crisis. And I believe when we got into the crisis, it was terribly mishandled. Some firms were allowed to fail, some were bailed out, back and forth, and we rattled the markets. The markets couldn't predict what was going to happen next, and we had a financial meltdown around the world. And then we came up with this TARP legislation, which I strongly opposed.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it did more harm than good by far, and said so at the time. I said this will not work, and in fact I never used it. The legislation was to allocate $700 billion of our money to bail out toxic assets from Wall Street firms, and they never used any of it for that purpose. They wound up recapitalizing firms.
Right, and that's why you opposed it. That was your primary opposition to it?
Well, I didn't think it would work, and I also hated to see taxpayer money going into the financial industry. I believe we could have gotten out of that problem without turning to the taxpayers if we had simply had better policies in place. And I actually wrote an article at the time. It appeared in the Washington Post on September 27, 2008, in the middle of this crisis,
Mm-hmm.
saying there's a better way than TARP. And so a number of members of Congress from both parties called me up and said, would you come to Washington and talk to us? I did. I spent several days there, met with hundreds of members of Congress, and told them there were better ways than TARP. And in fact, in the first vote in the House, the House voted it down. And then finally the administration and the Senate leaders crammed it through and
Right.
and forced some House members to accept it. But I don't believe TARP was necessary, and I believe it caused a political backlash that we're still paying for and will for years to come.
Well, and that it culminated on the streets with Occupy Wall Street.
Yes.
But Bill, I mean, and I'm assuming that even those in the White House, including the president, would say, look, over the past few years, since we put in TARP, since the crisis, the very bottom of the crisis, the equity markets are up, and they are up big time, and we've seen the financials recover. So, isn't that evidence enough that, in fact, Washington did make it work?
No, I really don't think so. I think it's been a much deeper recession than we needed to have. I think it's been much more prolonged. The equity markets are up some, but we really haven't addressed the underlying problems. We have a serious fiscal crisis on our hands that nobody's dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
We have a health care plan that's adding $2 trillion to the fiscal crisis, and is not really fixing the problems in the healthcare system. We have a Dodd-Frank law, which really didn't address the issues that led to the crisis, didn't improve our regulatory system, in any meaningful way, and is going to probably be the death knell for for thousands of community banks. It just can't handle all these mountains of regulation that are being heaped on them. So no, I don't think government's made things better. I think the government has clearly made things worse. And it's not one party. I'm not criticizing one party. I believe both parties have been culprits here.
Right. Well, and I want to get to that. I want to just drill down to that one point you made about the Dodd-Frank rule and how you think it's actually going to be the death knell of thousands of banking institutions around the country. Is it simply because of the weight of the regulation, the higher costs associated with it? What exactly?
Well, it's the weight of the regulation. It's the cost of complying with it. You mentioned at the outset, Betty, that I'm chairman of Fifth Third Bancorp, which is a pretty large bank, and it's not going to something that Fifth Third can't handle. It's expensive. It's going to be more expensive for Fifth Third's customers because the bank has to get paid for these costs. But
so what does that mean? Higher fees for us? Higher fees?
The bank has to pass along those costs in one form or another, and will. But what I'm concerned about are not the Fifth Thirds of the world or the other large banks of the world. What I'm concerned about are the community banks. This Dodd-Frank law is 2,500 pages long. To put that in perspective, the Glass-Steagall Act, which was created in the Depression, it separated commercial banking from Wall Street banking, and it created the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. So the Glass-Steagall law was a pretty important law. It was 50 pages long. The Dodd-Frank law is 2,500 pages long, and most of it is an order, a series of orders to the regulators to regulate a whole bunch of things. And those regulations, when they come out, are probably going to be somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 pages long. How does a community bank cope with that? They don't. It's way too expensive. They don't have the people, and I believe we're going to force them out of business unless we come up with a much better way to regulate them.
Well, so Bill, before I let you go, then tell me, give me your short synopsis of what you think then should be done. What's the right way to do this?
Well, for one thing, we have a highly fragmented, highly politicized regulatory structure. It's not working. It's obviously not working, and we should have fixed that. We should have streamlined the regulators and come up with a much more independent, less politicized system of regulators, much more streamlined, and we should be regulating smarter, not just throwing volume at these banks. Now, people say, well, who cares if a couple thousand small banks or 3,000 small banks go out of business? Well, we all ought to, because small banks provide a disproportionate share of the lending to small businesses, and small businesses produce most of the jobs in this country, the new jobs. So it really has a serious impact on the economy when we cause the community banking sector to suffer the way we have.
Right.
And also, I would remind people that when you're in a small town, I grew up in a small town. The community bank is supporting the Little League and and the Boosters Club and the YMCA and the YWCA and so forth, and they really are the social fabric of these communities. So
Bill, I hear you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Bill Isaac, the chairman of Fifth Third Bancorp, the former FDIC chairman. And just quickly, the Dow is trading here still down about 71 points at 1354. S&P trading, exchanging hands at 1393. We've got the NASDAQ, the tech-heavy NASDAQ, the worst among the indexes, down about 1%, trading at 3074 as we head towards the closing bell. That does it for us here on In the Loop at high noon. Tomorrow on my television program, we're going to go high-tech, talking about Facebook and those RIM results. Will they be ugly? Dixon Dahl from venture capital firm DCM Partners with us. Be sure to tune in at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Talk to you all tomorrow.